Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. And please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube, and stay tuned for some new platforms for this podcast very soon. Kit Klarenberg and Mohamed Elmaazi join us today. New documents that appear to be from the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office have been leaked by a group that identifies as quote-unquote anonymous and is allegedly the same group that published leaked documents over the past 2 years about the UK Foreign Office covert programs. This batch of documents shows that Whitehall uses private contractors to infiltrate a variety of media, including smaller quote-unquote independent media and social media influencers and civil society. In this case, the stated noble objectives are things like improving literacy, ensuring balance in reporting, and countering disinformation. The real objectives revealed in the documents are something else entirely. There's also a bonus episode for patrons about how this seems like an evolved 21st century Operation Mockingbird. Kit Klarenberg is an investigative journalist who explores the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. He currently writes for RT. Mohamed Elmaazi is a journalist with experience in human rights law who's currently writing for Sputnik International. We recorded this on March 3rd, 2021. Today we have two journalists for our interview today, and one is Kit Klarenberg, who's traveling through Europe, and Mohamed Elmaazi returns to the show, and he is in London. Hello to both of you, and thanks so much. I'm really excited to talk with you. This is great.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I think most people are kind of aware of a story that has broken recently about some new documents that have been leaked, and they reveal a network of media and what looks to me more like an information warfare operation that's run out of the London Foreign, what do you call it, the Foreign Office?
Yeah, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office is
right.
Spangly name.
And basically it's to recruit and support a network of media in Eastern Europe against this, to weaken the state of Russia. And it's interesting because I have talked to Mohamed about a similar topic, the Integrity Initiative, back 2 years ago now. And there's a connection between the two of them, I think. And it also happens that Mohamed recently did an interview with Kit Klarenberg, and I'm going to link all of these things in the show notes. Everybody who wants to dig more into this, because there's a lot of material, we can't go into every detail. You can find all those links in the show notes for this podcast. And so they had an interview together, and I thought, oh, I want to talk to both of them and talk about this story. So I'm going to mostly shut up during this talk, but I do want to establish a few things before we get deeply into it. First of all, just to kind of orient everybody, let's go big picture first. The source of these documents is another anonymous group. I am personally not familiar with who they are. I don't know if anybody knows exactly who they are. And I just want to go through a quick timeline. On February 18th, Kit wrote an article on RT. And then the Gray Zone, a couple days later, Max Blumenthal reported on this as well. Mohamed then did an interview with Kit. I think that was published on the 24th of February. And then Kit, I saw there's another op-ed that you followed up with on the 25th. And just so people know, the previous set of documents and interviews of the Integrity Initiative that we talked about before, the Institute of Statecraft, all of that happened in December of 2018. So just to kind of orient everybody on the timeline for this. And if you could just do a little big picture for us, Kit, that would be great, on what you found in these documents, maybe how you came across them, and what you see happening here.
Right. I mean, that's a very broad question, but I mean, I would say that, overall, the files expose this very wide-ranging, program programs costing untold millions of pounds over several years that effectively serve to. It's the British state attempting to infiltrate civil society at every level in the kind of former Soviet sphere. So that's Central and Eastern Europe, the Warsaw Pact countries, but also former Soviet states themselves. And it goes further beyond. It goes further than funding journalists and charities and NGOs and media outlets. It's about the creation of content, but also bizarre things like plans to covertly fund and direct quiz tournaments, cultural events, film nights, competitions, online games, and all of this is just the end objective is to secretly undermine Moscow in some way or another. And I mean they seem to be have no qualms about about infiltrating any sphere of public or even private life in that part of the world, but also that they sorry, we'll try again. Also, they don't have any reservations about targeting even children, say. So there's the dimensions of this are vast, to say the least.
Right. And the leadership in the UK has not been shy about the fact that, I mean, they may use different terminology, like we need to fight radicalism and, the development of radicalism and extremism. We need to fight disinformation. Also here, it's a major topic here all the time. Particularly Russian disinformation has been, as you know, in recent years, just an obsession here. So it's not like they aren't stating those objectives publicly, but they don't really tell us how they're going to go about that. Or at least I didn't know that this kind of thing was going on.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is a lot of a lot of the documents, a lot of these projects, which are ultimately verbatim quote to weaken the Russian state. That's courtesy of Andy Price, the Foreign Office's counter disinformation and media development chief, is very open about the fact that these programs are to weaken the Russian state, and kind of unguarded comments in some files. He makes this clear, but a lot of them talk in very kind of lofty terms about strengthening democracy, or ensuring freedom of debate and speech, and improving media literacy, and all these other things. But there's one really striking quote which I keep on coming back to, which is that in one file, this is related to Open Information Partnership, which I think we'll probably discuss in some detail later. This Foreign Office contractor called Zinc Network, they specifically say, one barrier to combating disinformation is the fact certain Kremlin-backed narratives are factually true, and responding to inconvenient truths as opposed to pure propaganda is naturally more problematic. And so, what we can extrapolate from this is that, in other words, this is yet another strand of a wide-ranging kind of the wide-ranging elite effort to suppress and censor in sensitive information, and discredit perspectives that elites don't like, which can often be found in alternative and independent media and in outlets such as RT and Sputnik. And they're doing this under the kind of the bogus, the mirage of protecting democracy from external threats.
Right. That is the quote that jumped out at me too. And also, I guess the other thing, I don't want to get things out of order here, but just one of the things that really bothered me was the fact that they target social media influencers. And if I can find the quote, they say, audiences have strong brand allegiances to individuals. So essentially, the way I see it is our media and our governments, our institutions are suffering from a high level of distrust from the public. So they're going to places where people are trusted, and they're trying to, I don't know, exploit them, co-opt them. There are a lot of different terms you could use, and they probably vary based on the individual. It just that really bothered me about this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is another interesting thing that crops up in the files, is that they frequently use, without kind of shame or irony, terms like, independent or grassroots, when they're referring to organizations, whether that's again a charity or an NGO or a media outlet, or individuals like journalists or social media influencers or pundits, so they're independent, yet they receive funding, training, content creation support, or audience segmentation support and promotion from the British state in secret. So quite obviously they're not independent in any way, really, are they? If they're like coming out with, if these individuals gain a platform in the mainstream media, which has been provided to them covertly by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, directly or indirectly, and they're coming out with Whitehall approved key messages during these interviews. I mean, just by no stretch of the imagination could they ever be considered independent. I think this genuinely does raise very serious questions about all Western media reporting on Russia and the countries near abroad, is how they refer to it. Because when you have in one file, when they talk about how the Zinc network, who's this terrifying kind of covert Whitehall contractor, talks about how it can mount multi-layered rapid response communications campaigns around key events. And it cites this example of in April 2018, the Kremlin imposed restrictions on Telegram, which is an encrypted messaging app, and is an increasingly popular alternative to WhatsApp. And they boast of having activated, quote unquote, a range of content within 12 hours of the demonstration erupting. Now, these protests were widely covered in the Western media, including by the BBC, for instance, and they were obviously framed as a symbol of the Russian state evilly cracking down on privacy and freedom, blah 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 blah, which is interesting because the Western media is actually very anti-encryption on the whole. But it's pretty much certain that some of the content that this secret network created was featured by all of these outlets who covered the protests, and viewers would have been had zero idea that what they were seeing was funded, produced and edited in London as part of a wider information warfare effort. And I think that it speaks to what you say about how governments aren't trusted. This speaks to the experience of firms like Zinc Network. So Zinc Network's primary what would you call it, modus operandi is there's a very, very controversial program in the UK called Prevent, which is concerned with identifying extremist views in people and trying to push them away from turning violent and radical and blah 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 blah. I mean, there are innumerable problems with it, and critics claim that it's essentially a surveillance and manipulation campaign targeted at Muslims. And I mean, I'd say that's that's beyond argument. Like that's why it exists and what it does. But under Prevent, Zinc Network create a lot of or they fund or manage or create NGOs and charities and social media platforms, which very subtly kind of extol what they call counter narratives. So they'll one narrative they attempt to counter is the fact that say terrorism amongst kind of Islamist terrorism arises from disenfranchisement at home and British military adventurism abroad, which is, again, I think says pretty objective fact that is one of its key causes. And the company will, through all of these multimedia, multi-channel campaigns, try and frame extremism as it's this grotesque aberration and there's no reasonable or rational kind of explanation for it, and all these other things. And if many people who end up they often approach individuals to be part of their campaigns without letting them know, even the name of their their agency. They'll have someone approach someone at a protest and say, hey, would you like to be featured in a video? And I mean, in Australia they got in trouble because they were approaching churches and asking them to have billboards outside, outside, which were preaching tolerance and inclusivity and all these other things. And there's one priest who was conned by this, who said, I feel dirty, because they don't tell them. And yeah, that there is a lot of people who, if they knew kind of say Muslim artists in the UK who absolutely would not cooperate or collaborate with Zinc if they knew that it was part of this kind of counter-terror program, who get conned into it. And I think that that speaks to a wider kind of I wouldn't even necessarily say a distrust, but a kind of wider perception, if not understanding that when a government does something, they usually have sinister ulterior motives to doing so.
Yeah, let me step back just a little bit on. So we have the UK Foreign Office, like our State Department.
Yes.
And then there's a department within that. And then you can see from these documents, I think, from what I've read, that they put out contracts for certain, I don't mean hit job contract, I mean contracts for bids. Yeah. And then there are private organizations who somehow know about these covert operations, and then they bid for them, they write bids. And is that the kind of thing that was in the documents?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that you say somehow they know about this. I mean, it's like there seems to be a revolving door, between government and the private sector. And a lot of these quote unquote private contractors, they are staffed by people who have experience at the highest levels of military and the intelligence services and the diplomatic services. And I mean, so for instance, this is one contractor who crops up in a lot of recently kind of hacked or leaked Foreign Office files. It's a firm called ARC, right? And so they are a consultancy that was engaged in all manner of skullduggery in the Syrian conflict. And they helped promote the white helmets and pretty much created them whole cloth as well. And like what James Lemessurier, or I don't even know how you pronounce his name, but he the White Helmet's founder, he was an ARC staffer for 2 years, and then his wife, his second wife was part of ARC for many years, and then joined this FCO contractor called Siren Associates. And then his third wife, Emma Winberg, who is a veteran FCO diplomat, started this firm called Incostrat, which was again involved in all these Syria psyops. So it's a very incestuous sphere indeed. Where everyone knows each other, and these firms are invited to fulfill these contracts, and I would suspect that they're invited because it's like plausible deniability. It's like they are doing exactly what the FCO wants them to do, and the FCO is directing them every step of the way. But the FCO can say, "Oh well, we're not doing this."
Yeah, if I can just read a little bit of your article, I believe it's the first article. Let me just double check. Yeah, the first article where you talk about co-opting social media influencers, and you say that Zinc, one of those contractors, right? They're a contractor. Yeah. That they maintained a secret network of Russian-speaking social media influencers to promote, quote, media integrity and democratic values, unquote. And then you say, curiously, its relationship with these individuals is said to have involved, quote unquote, daily management of these influencers. And then another excerpt, you say that they're recruited via YouTube, Facebook, VK, and Instagram. The company, quote, helped them build their brands and improve their content in order to grow their audience share, and established a co-owned channel with YouTube to host their content, help them access one another's audiences, co-creating content that tackled complex social issues. And then you say that they taught these influencers how to, quote, make and receive international payments without being registered as external sources of funding. So foreign agents, or
Yeah,
whatever we call that here, the
yeah,
FOR thing, people are constantly getting caught doing work for foreign governments and not reporting that they do. But anyway, and then you say they, quote, develop editorial strategies to deliver key messages while minimizing their, quote, risk of prosecution, unquote, and managing, quote, project communications to ensure the network's existence. And indeed, at this end here, UK government's central role in creating it were kept confidential. And it reminds me, like, I don't know if Zinc then has subcontractors and there are shell company. It almost reminds me of a laundering kind of operation. And as both of you have sort of mentioned to me, some of the people doing this work may not even know who they're working for. Although I guess they have to wonder where money's coming from. But anyway, maybe you want to expand on that a little bit.
yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, like, I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, it is the case that we don't know the extent to which, you know, these people are aware of the fact they're being used. I mean, I think the fact that it involved daily management, I mean, they must have,
Yeah.
like, you must twig, like, and I think as well that, like, you know, when it's that level of support, like when your videos are being written for you, the script's being written for you, it's being edited, yeah, it's being, you know, co-produced in London. And this is a really interesting thing as well, is that, like, when you go on like Zinc's website, they you know, they'll refer to say, the fact that we produced, you know, some Russian language children's TV shows, and, like, I mean, and knowing the company as I did, like, the you know, that jumped out to me. I knew exactly what they were up to. But it's like, I mean, I find it really inconceivable. I find it really inconceivable that at least some of these people don't know, because when you have that level of contact, and you're very specifically being taught to, you know, how to circumvent foreign agent legislation and stuff. Like, I mean, you obviously know that it's highly secretive. And I think that it's you know, ultimately you can't really blame these people, because if someone approached me and said, you know, would you like to I mean, I probably wouldn't just on principle, but it's like, you know, if I was some lowly YouTuber and an agency approached me saying, would you like some money and help with, you know, reaching more people, etc., it would be quite hard to resist. And, you know, maybe I wouldn't dig too deep, but, you know, it's the information is out there. If you Google it, it's not, you know, overly hidden, you know, the kind of nature of Zinc Network and who they work for and what they're doing. So you could probably fill in blanks, I would imagine.
Now, are they a British organization, Zinc? I didn't
Yes.
look into them myself.
Yeah,
Okay.
they used to be called Breakthrough Media, and then they changed their name recently to Zinc Network for reasons unclear. But they're a veteran Whitehall PSYOPs contractor and have been involved in just, you know, countless, and all of their work is covered by the Official Secrets Act, to the point that sometimes people who work there don't even know, you know, like, quite what they're doing.
Right.
And it's just like, but I mean, in respect of the influencer stuff, that, you know, if you look at their job ads, a lot of the stuff they post is for kind of, you know, UK based foreign language, you know, video editors and all these other things. And you've got to think that this isn't just purely this kind of operation isn't purely restricted to Russia. It's they're doing this all over the world. This is what Open Information Partnership was about, which is,
Good.
I guess,
I'm glad you won't get into that, because that's
yeah,
exactly what, you know, you can't keep your mind from saying, well, if they're doing it here, isn't this just probably part of a much bigger project? So yeah, I'm glad you're getting into the Open Information Partnership.
Yeah, so I mean, Open Information Partnership, which is, I mean, this is something which the last Integrity Initiative leak had all of these files related. This was like leak 7, I think it was in May. It had all of these files related to this Foreign Office project called Expose, and I didn't know what to make of it at first, and then a few days later, rather serendipitously, like in a very quiet announcement, the Foreign Office made clear that they were funding this new endeavor called Open Information Partnership, and a lot of the people who, and indeed organizations who were associated with OIP, as I'll now call it, were also named in the exposed file. So it was clearly the same thing, and essentially this is an alleged what's the word? It's an alleged coalition of NGOs across Europe, which is all about fact checking and fighting fake news and all these other, again, lofty ideals. But then in the files, the files themselves are very very clear that this is about that this is a kind of insidious tool for achieving Whitehall's foreign policy objectives. So there's a very striking passage which refers to like how exposed / OIP could be weaponized in order to influence elections, quote unquote, taking place in countries of particular interest to the Foreign Office. And so, it talks about in the, how the OIP would monitor online communications 3 months ahead of an election, and then identify key trends and narratives and activity, and then they could ramp up and then on the basis of that analysis, they could start pumping out content, i.e. propaganda, and this would intensify as election day got nearer, in order to engage different target audiences and this sort of thing. And the new document shed even further light on this, because they note, for instance, that I'm not sure whether your listeners are aware of what Bellingcat is, or have the misfortune.
We pretty much are, yeah.
Yeah, the immense misfortune of being aware of Bellingcat. But this is I'm fairly sure that they're a intelligence agency cut out, and they receive a lot of info from the intelligence services, which is then as we've discussed with Zinc, which is then presented as kind of independent journalism and research. But the key thing is that the new files note that leading up to the elections in Macedonia in 2019, that Bellingcat and the Atlantic Council's DFR lab and Zinc network, they were flown out at the Foreign Office's request to respond, quote unquote, to the election happening there. And then so over 2 weeks, that those organizations provided intensive training and support to Most Network, which is a national news outlet.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you just throw in a little bit of background about that election, what happened, the tie and all that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is. I mean, I was going to get to this, but it's like,
okay.
It's a bit obvious. No, it's all right. But it's like this would obviously be an election in which was of intense interest to the Foreign Office, because it pitted a very pro-European Union, pro-NATO candidate against a kind of pro-Russian, more kind of or we could call them, say, like more pro-Eastern European kind of anti-integrationist candidate on the other hand. And the pro-NATO candidate was so pro-NATO that he was actually in charge of negotiations for entering NATO, and he made clear that this will be my first priority in office, will be to join the military alliance and start the process for joining the EU, because Macedonia is a country which was kind of carved out of the former Yugoslavia in the early 90s, and has numerous kind of internal cultural, historical, and political splits between people who very much look eastwards, and you kind of see Russia as a kind of protector and friend and ally, and other people who more look westwards and kind of crave European integration, all these things. And that in that election, the pro-NATO candidate won. And I think if you look at polling, prior to voting, the pro-NATO candidate did have a kind of clear lead. So I'm not sure how, if at all, whether this was decisive in clinching their victory. But I don't think the same is true of other elections. And so, for instance, in Moldova, that was again a contest in November 2020. That was a contest between a kind of this upstart outsider who was very pro-NATO and pro-EU versus the incumbent president, who was Igor Dodon, and like he was very, very, very pro-Russian. And Moldova is a country which is split between its Russian-speaking and Romanian-speaking population. And the pro-NATO candidate's victory there was regarded widely and reported as as a major kind of shock upset. And you've got to bear in mind that in the internal files, Moldova is noted as part of it's being part of the most vital space in the Open Information Partnership Network. And there are two organizations in the country which are OIP network members. And then they obviously could have served as conduits for OIP propaganda. And and it also has several members in Belarus, and where of course that's that's listed as another key area of interest in the documents. And so again, if you bear in mind a lot of the all we've discussed and all the references in the files to funding citizen journalists and civil society organizations, you think that there's a lot of quote unquote citizen journalists who were producing the reports on protests and unrest in the country, which were then featured in the Western media. Like they were kind of key to Western coverage of this. So again, it's an open question how influential OIP secretly was, in that coverage.
Yeah. So there are a few familiar organizations within that partnership, and they talk about the 4 founding members being Bellingcat, which anybody in the independent media that focuses on foreign policy and war is familiar with Bellingcat and has probably gotten into a fight with them on Twitter at somewhere along the line. And and then there's also the Atlantic Council, the NATO propaganda arm, as you accurately say, the Digital Forensic Lab, and that sounds very familiar to me too. I know that I don't remember specifics, but I know I've come across that many times. And then the Media Diversity Institute, which I'm not familiar with, and then Zinc, the 4th one you mentioned. But also, if I could just throw another question that just popped into my head, these documents, how did people, like with WikiLeaks, they're well known, they publish repositories of documents and things like that. How do people come across these documents this time around? Like, how does that organization, this other anonymous organization, how do they signal to people that they've got a new dump of documents out there?
It's an interesting question, because I think that people actually will struggle to come across these documents, because the social media has banned their publication, their kind of source publication, because on the suspicion that they're hacked. And so, but there's one. I found it's called Freenet, and it's associated with Anonymous, allegedly, and it's a kind of information clearinghouse where lots of stuff gets posted. And there was one particular poster on there who kept on posting all of these. They posted the original Syria, original. They posted these documents in September last year, which were related to British psyops in Syria, which a lot of the firms named in the Russian papers were also involved in. And I just kind of kept an eye on them ever since then, and every so often, at seeming random, these files get posted. But I think that what's really interesting is they've been largely ignored by other journalists. But one writer who did a fantastic job on covering this was Max Blumenthal of the Grey Zone project, and he wrote an extensive article covering numerous aspects of the new files. And Twitter slapped this label on anyone not only sharing it but liking it, which said, "Oh, this file, this article is is based on hacked documents. Be warned." And I think, Mohammed, you wrote about this, right?
I did, in fact, I did two short pieces. One noting the fact that this warning had been put onto it, and then the next day a follow-up piece with the title "Thanks, Jack," because Max and Aaron did a video noting that after their warning was put on their tweets, saying these documents may have been the documents in this article may have been hacked. Their article went viral. They said it's their first ever viral article. I think they said it's the highest level of internet traffic on any given day that they've had on their website.
Yeah.
And people started actually doing memes where they would because the warning automatically appears on, or did appear on, any tweet that had the link. So people would have memes where they'd have completely different pictures or videos on there, and then the warning would appear saying the documents, this link, the source material may have come from hacked documents. And so it became, gamers started to do it. It was actually quite funny. So my follow-up piece was about how it backfired. And then less than, was it 24 or 48 hours later, they took off the warning. So it appears to have had the opposite effect than what was intended, which may be why they ended up taking off the warning, that and the fact that it was written about. So that's yeah, that's that situation. It's well worth reading, as Kit has said.
Yeah, the sort of the Streisand effect.
Yes.
But I guess one of the questions that I had asked was, well, is there a repository, of these documents? I guess it was been a bit spoiled by the way that there's a searchable archive when WikiLeaks sort of puts things out, and it's clear that things have changed. Harder to get these things, but anyone has access to it if they're willing to take the risk, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a system of trial and error. I mean, I think that there's an enormous amount of material does get hacked / leaked like all the time. It's just about knowing like where to find them. So there's distributed denial of secrets, which is very good at hosting in kind of sensitive leaked files from law enforcement or governments, etc. But yeah, I mean, I think that it is a pity they're not more widely available. I think that as we saw with the Integrity Initiative files, that often they are extremely rich repositories of information on the deep state. Like it's all there in black and white in a way which you would never see. Like that. These documents were written in the expectation or that the hope that no one would ever see them, and they're at times extremely unambiguous in terms of how sinister, like what they intend to do and what they're doing is.
Is this a good time to shift over to drawing the parallels between this and the Integrative Initiative? What did I just
Integrity Initiative.
Integrity Initiative back a couple of years ago, and you guys, there's some intersection between your work there and the stories that you have to tell on that. Or should we wrap up the first part of this, or should we just sort of shift over now into drawing the parallels?
I mean, I think I'd be happy to do that. I mean, I think that there's one. I'd like to chat about the Reuters aspect of this.
Oh yeah, please do.
Because this is like, I mean, I think that's it's a very, very interesting. It's very, very, very interesting, and this is something that this is what one of the joys of these files is that they often can the contractors involved will often offer case studies of work they've done elsewhere, which is very illuminating, and it kind of it highlights what they're actually up to. And so in Reuters the Thomson Reuters Foundation, which is the allegedly independent quote unquote charitable quote unquote arm of Thomson Reuters Newswire, which is the world's leading newswire, or one of, next to Associated Press, and the leak files indicate that Reuters Foundation were involved in a number of psyops in Russia, and Max Blumenthal wrote very well and very extensively about this. And so they were doing things like bringing crews of Russian journalists over to the UK on press tours in order to kind of cultivate them, in order to, create kind of sympathetic voices within the Russian media, and that they were, and again, when these people returned home, they served as kind of influence networks and recipients of kind of Whitehall propaganda, but they this is what was really interesting to me was that in one file they talk about having set up a number of news services in again countries of interest to the UK Foreign Office, and the one cited example of this activity was Aswat Masria, which was a neutral news outlet that was established following the 2011 Egyptian revolution, and it was funded to over several years by secretly by the Foreign Office to the tune of about 2 million, and it was all based in Reuters offices, so it was very much a Reuters newswire operation, not a charitable foundation operation. And they boast about how it became Egypt's leading media organization, and it became one of the top most visited websites in the country, and also the fact that it's and this is the interesting part, that its content was offered for free across not only the region but internationally, and in English and Arabic. And I would suggest that bearing in mind that the UK is the biggest investor in Egypt, and it has a very long and at times rather bloody and dubious relationship with the country, and has been involved in all manner of meddling, like it effectively created the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1950s in order to undermine Egypt's ruler, General Nasser. And so they when Hosni Mubarak, who was a brutal dictator, was ousted in 2011, they would have had an obvious interest in shaping events there, covertly and overtly. And as the country it conducted a very difficult transition to democracy, and their investments would have been under threat. Their economic interests in the country and the region more widely would have been potentially compromised by a non-Western leading or the Western sympathetic leader, which seemed to be the case actually when Mohamed Morsi, who was the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, was elected. And so this website's been taken offline now, but if you look at its Facebook page, it's very, very illuminating. And so there's a lot of things they report uncritically. So President Sisi's landslide election victory in 2014, when he got nearly 97%, which I think a Soviet leader, right. a Soviet leader would have been more than happy with. They would have considered that better than they were expecting. And that's reported completely uncritically. And there's no reference to the fact that he ran virtually unopposed because most other candidates got arrested and jailed, or dropped out of the race out of fear. And there's no reference to the fact that international observers said that the process was totally undemocratic. But then equally, in 2013, the Sisi's security forces under Sisi's command, they brutally crushed a protest in Cairo, and they slaughtered over 800 people, and we're just
young people, mostly young people as well, unarmed. Young people.
It was completely it was exactly, man. It was
mostly sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood, but they were younger and more, and actually a more progressive branch. Unfortunately, they were heavily abandoned by. There isn't much of a left in Egypt because it's been crushed over decades, but by the liberals, by basically people who got kind of propagandized or allowed themselves to think that when Egypt had its first ever truly democratic elections, the Muslim Brotherhood candidate won. I mean, he had to leave the party to run for president, but effectively he was the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, and he won.
Morsi.
That's Mohamed Morsi, and that's what you would expect in a country where all other opposition was crushed, and the only, if you like, non-state group that was allowed to exist in Egypt was this sort of semi-conservative Islamist party, which was also a business party, if you like, because they were allowed, people were allowed, as long as you didn't get politically active, if you were involved in civil society, healthcare, things like that, and business, they allowed you to operate. The left had been crushed over years. And so, of course, that was going to be the only meaningful organized opposition once Mubarak stepped down that would be in a position to field candidates. So he wins, and then after he wins, there's a massive campaign by the wider state to undermine him, to the point that Morsi is basically just some dude wearing a suit in a building. He's not really a president, and whatever their mistakes and flaws, and I'm not sympathetic to a more religious sort of worldview at all, but whatever their mistakes or flaws, they were completely undermined to the point that he was overthrown in a coup. And then young people who were upset about this were abandoned to the point that they could just be slaughtered, as you say, to the point it was being live streamed. They were inside a building, filming from inside, begging for like help, and unfortunately a degree of hatred was directed towards them because of, was it a year or almost 2 years of just nonstop vitriol from the press that would never be allowed before or since Morsi. Right, it was like Venezuela style, just rabid, absolute rabid, the kind of stuff that you wouldn't, just completely just making up whatever they wanted. And so, and also it's important to note that the elections that Sisi won in, I'll end on this just quickly, but the elections were like unbelievably low participation rates, and they even extended voting for, I think, for another week, and they started busing people in, and they talked about how it's a legal obligation to vote and everything. And even then, it was incredibly low percentage of the voting age population. I think it
was like less than half. It was less than half, wasn't it?
Yeah, much less. And that is a sign that even with the propagandized sort of liberals who backed the coup, we're all now regretting it, because anybody who's make the most remotely critical comment finds themselves arrested, thrown into prison, prosecuted for defaming the state, or fake news, or propaganda, or publishing news which contradicts an official statement of the military, or things like that. It's just like absurd, the level of mass arrests and prosecutions. I mean, worse than anything even under Mubarak or those before him, just to send the signal that.
Well, I think it's like there are about 110 people in prison. Sorry, 110,000 people in prison in Egypt, and like half of them are political prisoners.
Yeah, mass journalists. It's like Turkey style. What you've seen in Turkey. Turkey and Egypt, probably the highest political prisoner population on the planet currently. It's,
but I mean, I think thanks a lot for that, man. I mean, this is no. This is exactly it. That that's the kind of state of human rights in Egypt, and there's not a trace of it in Aswat Masriya, because hey, it's a neutral news outlet, right? It's not for them to criticize mass murder. And so, I mean, a perfect example of this, as I say, is the slaughter in Cairo, where 800 people, young people, unarmed people, were killed with often British made and sold weapons. And there's this news outlet set up by Reuters. It barely mentions it, apart from repeatedly sharing an article which reports on the results of an official investigation into the massacre, which blames the death toll on protesters themselves, saying they provoked and initiated attacks on security forces, and which is the most obvious whitewash imaginable. But again, it's reported uncritically in Aswat Masriya, and so this would have been a very, very useful tool indeed, and it gets shut down in March 2017 because the FCO pulled its funding for the outlet. And you've got to wonder whether was it shut down because it had fulfilled its founding purpose, which was to ensure that a kind of suitably pliable, congenial, pro-British, pro-Western leader was installed in Cairo. And I think that this is also doubly interesting because Reuters in the past, and we found this out in January last year, that in the late 1960s, there was this British government secret unit called Information Research Department, which was founded in 1948 to basically perpetuate anti-Soviet, pro-British, pro-American propaganda, and it was engaged in all manner of kind of different information, all manner of different conflicts, and it was very, very, very influential in terms of impacting news coverage in the UK and worldwide. But in the late 1960s, Information Research Department funded the creation of Reuters Middle East News Service, to provide information in English and Arabic for reuse by journalists internationally, i.e. in the precise manner of Aswat Masriya. And so, if you look at the internal files there, which were released, as I say, in January 2020, there are Foreign Office ministers who say that the reason that we are doing this is to influence, in some measure, the whole Reuters output, and UK interests would be very well served by the new arrangement. And when this was revealed, there was understandably kind of outcry that this objective, neutral, unimpeachable purveyor of news had actually been involved in a propaganda operation, funded secretly and directed secretly by the British state. And at the time, a spokesperson for Reuters told the BBC that this kind of arrangement wasn't in keeping with our trust principles, and we wouldn't do this today, and that we received no government funding and we're unbiased, all this stuff. And it's like these files make clear that they were lying. There's an outright lie. They're still doing this exact same thing. So what else have they got to hide? Where else have they set up covertly or overtly on behalf of the British state, news outlets in order to shape agendas and narratives and to, oppose certain leaders or certain movements and support others? It's inconceivable that they haven't, because they specifically referred to the fact that they have done this in other places.
Yeah, and it's really tempting to talk, to even just speculate about other ways that this same model, let's say, is being used. And I'm gonna actually ask you for your thoughts on that in the bonus question. But so it's a shame that we could break this into like 5 different segments. There's so much information here. So for listeners, we're just going to have to direct you to all kinds of things that has already been written, and to keep following the work of both these 2 journalists to, if this has sparked your curiosity. We just don't have enough time to get into all of it. So make sure you follow up on those links. But so let's draw the parallel now to the Integrity Initiative. Let's just remind people a little bit of what happened there, and just your thoughts on it. Maybe if you could, Mohamed, if you could just kind of
Mohamed, go, like, you lead me.
Yeah, just kind of like remind us what you found then, because there were, I don't know, some really interesting stories and like events, things that happened to you too during this that will probably spark people's memories. But yeah, just sort of refresh our memory on what that was all about, if you would.
Sure. So the Integrity Initiative is a project of an institute called the Institute for Statecraft, both of which are funded by the Foreign Office, or get funding also from directly or indirectly from, I think the Institute for Statecraft gets funding from the Smith Richardson Foundation, which is like a market fundamentalist neoconservative think tank.
Facebook.
Whose founder, yeah, exactly, Facebook. The Smith Richardson Foundation, the guy from the Vicks fortune actually set it up. Vicks, like Vapor Rub, set it up, and he was a sponsor, I think, of Irving Kristol. Irving's Kristol's like a very well-known actual original neoconservative, and his son as well is William Kristol, of the Project for a New American Century, the now defunct neocon think tank, which called for post-Soviet collapse, called for the United States to become the single sole superpower of the world, et cetera, et cetera. And so the Integrity Initiative, it essentially set up what they called clusters, right, of think tank members, researchers, journalists, politicians, academics, and current and former military and national security members, both inside Britain, but they were expanding in France and Germany, in the Balkans, in North Africa,
Spain.
and Spain and other countries, and it was still seemed in its quasi-embryonic stage in terms of the documents. It was a couple years worth. Like, it was, you could see that they were talking about expanding further and entrenching it deeper. And the idea is each would be a sort of localized group of people who could push through certain narratives. But of course, the public wouldn't know. So if the public sees an article being written or tweeted or posted, or an attack against or a criticism against a particular politician or country, they wouldn't necessarily know that this is part of a privately organized, prearranged meeting of people, of governmental and non-governmental and national security linked figures who were, at least originally, if not still to this day, being funded by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and NATO and all the rest of it. And two of the key figures in this organization, Integrity Initiative, as well as the Institute of Statecraft, as well as a whole host of other groups, are Daniel Lafayette and Chris Donnelly. And these are, Chris Donnelly, for example, and Lafayette's got like similar credentials, was a British colonel of the UK's Specialist Group Military Intelligence, or SGMI. And among the documents he wrote or was a private report on reforming the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in February 2018. And then there was another report, these are of the leaked hacked documents from the Integrity Initiative. There was a private discussion with General Sir Richard Barons, who commanded the Joint Forces Command till his resignation in April 2016. And this private discussion with the general was dated 12th of October. And I just want to give you an example of the kinds of things, the kind of worldview that these people have. Chris Donnelly is very well known for being quite hawkish on Russia, saying we're behind. Putin is playing three-dimensional chess. In fact, he doesn't even play chess. He plays Go, this ancient Far East sort of game that is multi-dimensional, and we're well behind them. And he testified to that rather terrible Russiagate parliamentary inquiry report, which resulted in a conclusion that said, okay, fine, there's no actual evidence that Russia sort of influenced Brexit or what have you, but we think that they did do this, and we think that the reason there is no evidence is because the security forces weren't looking for it, or they weren't looking hard enough. And this is in a mass surveillance state. So basically,
they just didn't notice because there wasn't the.
Well, they're working back from their conclusion. So a few politicians have said, and one of the key witnesses, in addition to Anne Applebaum, right,
who's Integrity Initiative as well.
Yes, is Chris Donnelly. And so it's like people who, so you guys have this information that somehow MI5, MI6, GCHQ, which is our NSA, that vacuums up everything. Somehow they've missed this, but these people haven't. So that's just an example. And then I'll give you this key document, a quote from a key document. Donnelly's private report starts off with a viewpoint that is significant. He says, quote, 50 years ago, only about 1/3 of UK government spending went on health, education, social security. Today, that figure is about 2/3. If we consider that foreign affairs or defense need more investment to strengthen their capabilities and capacity, either specifically for Brexit or more generally, then the first challenge is to change public expectation so that the trend of the past 2 generations can be reversed and funding transferred to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the Ministry of Defense. So basically, we spend 2/3 on health, social care, education. We need to take 50% of that and give it to the Foreign Office and the War Department or the Ministry of Defense. And then in a private discussion with General Barons, who I'd mentioned was already Joint Forces Command until, until April 2016, in this private discussion, key points that we know from this document, right, from this with key members of the Integrity Initiative, we have to assume is with Chris Donnelly and these others, because they are the main people of the Integrity Initiative. He says that the West no longer has a military edge on Russia, end quote. That's a literal quote. And that's, as I had written at the time, when I was reviewing the documents, it seems rather difficult to reconcile with the fact that the US military expenditure in 2017 was $610 billion, more than the next 6 countries combined. And the 2018 increased to 700 billion, places the US above the next 10 countries combined, whereas Russia's total military spending in 2017 was $66.3 billion, which was actually a 20% reduction from the year before. And that's according to the Stockholm International Peace Institute, which is a sort of an establishment institute which major think tanks in the United States and even governments like use their data. So it's interesting. They also have direct links with the 77th Brigade, which is a psychological warfare unit that was managed by Chris Bell, Brigadier Chris Bell, who received an OBE, although I think he resigned apparently in January of this year in disgrace for lying about a relationship he had with a female subordinate. But that's just that's just an interesting side note, right? And the 77th Brigade, Chris Bell at the time was also named as a member of one of these clusters, right? And there were also journalists who were named, British journalists who were known for being like Russiagators, you know, people who published with the Times, or one Caldwell, who publishes with the Guardian. What's her first name?
Codwaller.
Caldwell, yeah. Her name was on one of them.
Carol Codwaller.
Carol Codwell, yeah, who at the time was quite like smeary of WikiLeaks and Assange and linking with Russia and things like that. Lots of insinuations. I don't know.
Big
if she
Russiagator too. Big Russia.
Just a huge, like I mean, and this is really interesting as well, because like, you know, she staked out this entirely undeserved reputation as an investigative journalist for her work on Cambridge Analytica, and yet Steve Catham, who was this NATO guy who did a lot of work for SCL Group, which is the parent company of Integrity Initiative, he is part of the Integrity Initiative's UK cluster. So she would have been in very close quarters with with that individual by token of her association with Integrity Initiative.
There you go. And actually, just to tie off for the 77th Brigade, it was formerly known as Security Assistance Group and was reconstituted as 77th Brigade in 2015. And they brought together the Army's Media Operations Group, 15 Psychological Operations Group, the Security Capacity Building Team, and Military Stabilization and Support Group. And so they all combined, and according to an FOI request, a Freedom of Information request to the Ministry of Defense in 2016, they were made up of 153 regular soldiers and 123 reserve soldiers. And the thing is, they're basically, so it's a propaganda warfare unit. And the interesting thing is, I mean, maybe this is a bit too deep background, right? I wrote about this at the time, but it was never published, right? Because I had a very long article that is actually still sitting in my drafts. The 77th Brigade's name is an homage to the 77th Indian Infantry Brigade of the Chindits, which was founded by a Special Operations Executive member, Brigadier Orde Charles Wingate, in World War II. And Wingate was described as, quote, one of the most passionate Zionists of his day, end quote, by the Pro-Zionist Middle East Forum, which was founded by Daniel Pipes. So, I mean, there's no question there's a pro-Zionist group. He's openly so. And he, quote, organized the special night squads in Palestine. So before Brigadier Order Charles Wingate went to India and founded the 77th Indian Infantry Brigade, he founded the special night squads, which the Israeli army traces back its origins. And according to military historian MRD Foote, and the special night squads were a counterinsurgency unit that unleashed a wave of terror against the indigenous Palestinian population during the so-called Arab revolts. So even the idea that the people who founded that even chose the name 77th Brigades, like that there is an homage back to these sort of counterinsurgency propaganda and quasi-death squad units that go back to colonial India and colonial mandate Palestine. I think.
Well, I was gonna say that the symbolism with the name extends even further. So I mean, the 77th Brigade is split into 6 separate columns, and its 5th column is its media operations unit, which covers. So 77th Brigade engages in. It has a network of real, fake, and automated accounts online, which are used to discredit kind of independent journalists and government critics, and disseminate propaganda. And this is notable because the 5th column, that is a phrase that was coined by Emilio Mola, who was a nationalist general during the Spanish Civil War. And in the 30s, during that war, he said that he had 4 columns of troops who would attack Madrid from the outside, while quinta columna, a 5th column of covert supporters inside the city, would undermine the Republican government internally. So it's ever since, it's been kind of parlance for covert faction of subversive individuals who aim to undermine a state or an organization from within. And so it's like that's quite fitting.
That's actually brilliant additional context there. So these are the people that Chris Donnelly and Dan Lafayette are directly working with, and those are the that's the worldview and the agenda that they have, which is very pro-NATO, very pro-expansionist NATO. In one document, they called for the mining of a harbor in Ukraine when things were kicking off there, and Sevastopol, was it?
Yeah.
And they're also involved with the Prevent program, which is, as Kit noted, is this sort of idea that there's a pre-criminal phase. So before you become a criminal terrorist extremist, there's a pre-criminal phase, and it's our job to prevent you from going to the pre-criminal phase. And there's various indicators and that you have to watch out for. And now everyone who is in any kind of publicly funded organization, from nursery schools to middle school, high school, university, local government, charities, have to have people trained in the Prevent program, and you have to watch out for the indicators for what they call non-violent extremism. And one of the core indicators: have you become recently religious? Have you become recently not religious? Do you seem that you're not that you're isolated from the group, or do you see a willingness that they really want to join a group? Do you express opposition to UK foreign policy? Right, that's one of the key things to look out for. And so that means can you imagine a student in school saying, why is it that Britain is helping the state of Israel kill Palestinians? Oh, and you can get reported via the Prevent program. And that's not just it happens. And of course, it's heavily focused on immigrant and diaspora populations, Muslim, Asian, what have you, because of course they're the ones whose heritage comes from a part of the world which is very knowledgeable about these issues and cares about these issues.
And experiences them firsthand.
Yeah, and experiences them firsthand. In many cases, this is why they are here, is because, to quote somebody here once, the reason we are here is because you were over there with us, right? Yeah. And so, and of course, this targets people who have environmental concerns, people who express sympathy with resistance groups, the Kurdish, etc., etc. And this is everywhere.
Sorry, so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry, but I was going to say that, I mean, just to really sum up how awful Prevent is, and there is a hugely, I'll get into it in a second, but the Prevent program, there are numerous cases of children who are people who are in their early teens who have expressed kind of views which could be broadly seen as even socialist or anti-fascist at school, while they're learning about civil rights, say, in America, and they'll mention, oh well, I went on an anti-racist demonstration in my local town or city, and their teachers will report them to this program because they're at risk, which will mean to say
it's crazy.
Which will mean to
be clear.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I want to say, to be clear, there has been intense resistance to this. The National Teachers Union opposes it. Other unions have come out strongly. There have been conferences. Of course, COVID has made it difficult for mass organization in the way. I helped to organize a massive conference on this before when I was where was I working? I might have
That's
actually
great,
been
man.
unemployed at the time. This was a couple of years ago. And so there have been loads, and there have been report after report on this, all kinds of reports saying that the science is bunk. This isn't based on any legitimate science. This is
Yeah.
basically a counter dissent program. There's no evidence that there is such a thing that you can actually prevent people from becoming terrorists this way. In fact, it may be more counterproductive. And yet the
Yeah.
government keeps being expanded. It even gets put on a statutory footing because it wasn't originally legally required. And so that means anybody that takes any public money, and of course, where are you getting money from in the age of austerity, right? Where can you to set up your NGO or your charity? You have to get money from somewhere. And so public funds are the main source if it's not an oligarch or a foundation. And that means you have to institute it. But just because there is lots of resistance doesn't mean every single teacher is politically knowledgeable and fully understands the ramifications. Lots of teachers are just people, and they get trained in this thing. And some push back and will do their best not to report students. But at the end of the day, there's also pressure for reporting. So a school that I used to go to, a university called the School of Oriental and African Studies, was put under heavy pressure for the fact that they weren't referring anybody to prevent. And they're like, all these other institutions are reporting loads of people. And while I really did not like the CEO, right, because of neoliberalism, all the heads of universities are all called CEOs and things like that, right? Because she was a Blairite who advocated on behalf of the Iraq War on his behalf. The one thing I would give her credit for is that she resisted this, probably because there was loads of opposition, because it's known as a lefty school, not obviously not the bureaucracy, not the leadership. There are no lefty leaderships in universities, right? But in terms of student base and some of the faculty, in fact, it's one of the few places. That's why it's constantly being assaulted and attacked for being and smeared. I mean, and they resisted, so there's pressure. This is a perfect case that shows that there's pressure for people to be constantly reporting. How come you haven't reported? How come you're telling me there's nobody in your school that's making comments that could conceivably need to be referred to? So the point is that Dan Lafayette and Chris Donnelly and the Integrity Initiative and the Institute for Statecraft, in addition to engaging in these various sort of pro-NATO propaganda networks that are, if you like, seems like a precursor or at least an overlap with all the kinds of things that Kit has been discussing at the beginning of this program that have been revealed from those most recent documents, the Zinc Network, BBC, Reuters, etc. In addition to all of that they're working on, they're also working on sort of cadet schools, military training for youth, for supposedly at-risk youth. And if you look at the pictures, the Shared Outcomes Initiative, for example, is one where it's all people of color, young people of color, supposedly at risk, that they're putting in these military academies and training them, supposedly to give them a military ethos, we're told. This is at the same time these people and this organization are also backing the arming of all kinds of groups, including reactionary theocrats in far-right Sunni chauvinist death squads in Syria, right? So it's a really perverse, multi-layered psyop propaganda militarization offensive directed towards European populations, Eastern European, Middle Eastern populations, as well as to the British population, claiming that they're engaged in counter-radicalization while also trying to imbue them with a military, certain community members with a military ethos. And quite frankly, I don't know how many of these young people know anything about the background of these people like Dan Lafayette or
I
Chris
mean,
Donnelly.
I think Mo as well. I was going to say that, like, just because we've gone off somewhat on a tangent, but
That's my fault. I apologize.
No, it's. I mean, I'm fine with it, but the listeners might not be. But I mean, I was going to say that, like, on that point in terms of people not knowing who these people are, the people involved in these programs, is a very revealing section of an internal statecraft file which is related to shared outcomes, and it talks about how well, Statecraft, i.e. the parent of Integrity Initiative, has a program, quote unquote, exploring the fundamental cause of radicalization, i.e. the Muslim mindset. And it goes on to say, which is, horrifying and offensive in the extreme, but it goes on to talk about how we engage directly with Muslim communities and use adventurous training laid on by the army to teach young people leadership, life skills, and other skills, and encourage them to undertake, the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which is when you walk a lot when you're younger, and it's but then there's a very revealing part of the file where Lafaidni, the aforementioned, says, this helps build trust and confidence in Muslim communities and to integrate their young people into mainstream British society. But we make no mention of de-radicalization, because if it was badged counter-radicalization, no one would participate in it. So they are very aware, again, that if they were honest about the fact that, hey, this is a government-funded anti-terror or terror operation that you are partaking in, that people would say no. So it's all about, the
obfuscation.
Subterfuge. Lying to people about the true nature of these things is so internalized by the people involved. And it's this kind of elitist notion of like, hey, well, we know it's good for them.
Yes, paternalistic in the extreme. While they would have no problem using these later trained young people if they don't join the British Armed Forces, maybe they can be used in the future to invade the next country as foreign fighters. And then we're told, oh, we can't lead these extremists back in the country and strip them of their citizenship, as Britain is doing more and more. So it's like, okay, so on the one hand, you encourage them to go. They think they're going off to do the right thing, to overthrow an authoritarian government that may well be authoritarian, but then they're joining really dangerous organizations that are quite frankly no better, in many cases even worse than the government. And then people say, what's wrong with these Muslims? Why are they traveling over there? So it's a perfect sort of supply chain. It's
because MI5 let them, it's just like it was like, I've spoken to people who were Muslims living in, particularly in Manchester, actually, they were kind of like the former, Libyan emigres who were had their passports taken in the wake of 7/7, which was the tube bombing here, and they were told in 2011, like, well, if you want to go out and fight in Libya, you're more than welcome to, and that was the case of the Manchester Arena bomber in 27, who was he went out to fight in that was Salman Abedi, who went out to fight in Libya and was rescued by a British Royal Navy boat, like when the group he was part of were in trouble. But just to get back on the subject of Integrity Initiative, I think that Mo and I both have the experience of visiting their offices, which were interesting for different reasons for the pair of us. I think that they they were very much, as Mo said, that it was kind of it was embryonic when they got busted. Like, they were very much in the process of building these international networks of influential voices in the media. They'd already had some successes, and they boast about the files of how they'd helped block the
appointment of Pedro Baños.
In Spain. So Pedro Baños,
security advisor.
Pedro Baños was this former, he was a former military advisor who was, kind of quite left wing and was very much open to dialogue with Russia, who was the Spanish government was going to appoint as their national security advisor. And when they found out about this, they started, spewing anti-Baños propaganda via various different platforms and means, and they were coordinating this via a messaging app group, and all of the, and then when it was,
articles were being published in the Spanish press. So he's pro-Kremlin. Within 24 to 48 hours, his appointment was pulled.
And this is the thing as well, is that, like, I think just that, again, to as we discussed about the FCO contractors running secret network cadres of journalists who can be activated. Like the really sinister thing about integrity initiative is that you'll see an article in the mainstream press which will be written by a quote unquote independent journalist, which will feature quote unquote independent research, and then we'll have a quote unquote independent expert commenting on it. And that article will entirely be a product of integrity initiative. It will be a journalist on their payroll. It will be a pundit that they pay, and it will be research that they commissioned. And it will be obviously heavily slanted and biased, but it will be presented as this kind of unbiased, objective, insight, which is that's really that's really insidious.
And that takes us full circle to the FCDO leaks that Chris has been talking about, right? Because that's largely the same idea.
Well, my name's
cutouts.
It's not Chris, but
sorry, Kit. I'm ironically, I'm actually staring at your name as well on the front of the screen.
You're probably thinking of Chris, the guy who you went to.
Chris Donnelly.
Chris Donnelly.
Yeah.
I spoke to him. I spoke to him on the phone once. He wasn't very friendly at all.
Yeah, he isn't friendly, I have to say.
No, but I mean, I think that just in respect of visiting their offices, I mean, it was just bear in mind that this was an organization which operated in these very lavish HQ in central London, which it's Two Temple Place, so this is right by the Thames, and it's this kind of crenellated Gothic style mansion, and they were in the basement, and it was probably one of the London office space is notoriously very expensive, and they were operating in it seemingly rent free because none of their staff were linked to the address via utility bills or whatever, so it was being provided to them by some force or agency or whatever. And I spoke to the former UK ambassador to Uzbekistan, Craig Murray, said that based on his diplomatic experience, he told me that he thought it was being provided by the security services, which wouldn't be at all surprising when you bear in mind that they've got former MI5 and MI6 people among their staff. But I think that the thing that I visited there in December 2018, and I was kind of going in blind. I'd seen I'd read a few of the files, but I was still quite, I was naive and green. I wasn't really cognizant of the true dimensions of this. And I got in by accident because I rang the doorbell, and the door was immediately answered by someone in a trench coat and fedora, who very much looked the part of a spy. They waved me in, and I walked in, and I went into their offices and got quite far into the building, and it was very, very strange. And this girl asked me what I was doing there, and I said, well, I'm from the press, I'd like to speak to someone. And so she asked for someone called Simon, and then this young lad kind of appeared. And the second that I said that I was from Russian state media, as I was at the time, he lost his mind. He was that wild eyes. He went pale. He's screaming, saying, "Get out now! Get out!
Oh my God!
Get out!" And then I did leave. Under duress and everything. He wasn't physically expelling me from the building, but he was invading my space and ominously shouting, "Get out!" And I was kind of sat by the Thames watching the sunset after this happened, thinking, oh well, I've kind of I managed to get in, but I didn't get anything. This is a kind of journalistic failure. And I remembered that she called out the name Simon, so I looked on their website in terms of their staff, and I found out that his full name was Simon Bracey Lane. And I Googled his name, and suddenly all of these articles start popping up about naming him as being part of Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. And also in these articles, bearing in mind that the reason that Integrity Initiative got in trouble was because a lot of the files talk about smearing Jeremy Corbyn. And they were, undertaking various different efforts to undermine Jeremy Corbyn, and they were doing this with UK government money, which is totally illegal.
They were retweeting articles that were
Yeah.
smearing Jeremy Corbyn as well, which is
Yeah.
should not be allowed.
Which is again illegal. And so like, and it was just so weird to me. And so like, on that basis, I just started, Googling him more. And then my suspicion, and bearing in mind that I've been writing about the UK spy cop scandal for a few years at this point, which is, in which undercover police officers infiltrated activist groups, overwhelmingly left-wing activist groups for years at a time, in the process, deceiving women into long-term relationships and sometimes fathering children with people they were spying on. And like, he just in the coverage of Bernie Sanders' campaign that he's mentioned, he just fits the bill. So he has no political history, he has no background in this kind of thing, and he turns up with a lot of money. And like, he was working for Bernie Sanders unpaid from September 2015 to May 2016. Like, so obviously he had quite a lot of cash available to him if he was able to do that, like live in America for free. It's extraordinary. And like, and other files as well, like he was the key kind of cluster builder. So he was traveling around the world, meeting up with people, trying to recruit them, working out ways in which they could further integrity initiatives' interests and undermine Russia and all this stuff. And it's just like, he's in his mid-20s, so he was obviously trained to do this kind of stuff. He says that they issued public statements, suggesting it was ludicrous that he was an espionage agent or whatever. But I just think that it's just inconceivable to me that if he, to get that kind of job with the organization, he would have been vetted by the security services, and the slightest whiff of revolutionary fervor on his part, it's inconceivable he would have gotten the job in the first place. And then he's like, traveling all over the world, meeting people in secret. And, we know from the integrity initiative files that there was a dedicated kind of point person within the Foreign Office, within all of the countries they were targeting. So, the Austrian embassy would have a dedicated integrity initiative contact person, and so on and so forth. And so, he's going to these countries probably under diplomatic cover, i.e. like spies do, and meeting all of these people in secret and trying to cultivate them. And then, in his write-ups on his various trips around the world, where he talks about meeting all of these people, there are moments where he offers personal observations, direct quote, on these various kind of targets for recruitment, where he'll say like, this journalist I met seemed scared, and certain topics caused their voice to drop and all this stuff. And it's just like, if you ever read the internal FBI files on how like people running undercover agents, the exact same kind of language is used. Like, and this is, he did this all over the world, including America. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, this is a great way to roll into our bonus question if you want to do that.
Sure.
Because you can't, when you read about these things. So the guys you came across in the Institute for Statecraft, they clearly didn't want to be exposed, right? And you get the sense that it was an embryonic operation at that point, at least this particular network. God only knows how many of these there are around the world, and have been since the Cold War era. And there it is, it extends into domestic things. You talk about the Prevent program, you talk about this guy, you talk about the Jeremy Corbyn aspect to this. And now this guy who's part of Bernie Sanders' campaign. Another thing, in the lead up to the 2020 election, there was an operation called the Transition Integrity Project. Now, I guess that could be an unfortunate coincidence with integrity. It's probably not related, but they were wargaming, things about the election. There was a Time article about a massive network of connected groups who were working to, well, even depending on what you read literally from the article or what you infer from it, but they, claim they were trying to protect democracy, protect the election and all that. And you just really wonder how far this extends. And Mohamed did an interview with Chris Hedges back during the Integrity Initiative reporting that he was doing. And in that you mentioned that this was similar to something we've all read about, Operation Mockingbird, back in the 70s. Now, if you talk to people who are ex-intelligence or in the know about intelligence, they will say all that stopped in the 70s after the Church Committee and all of those things. And the CIA was reined in, and they don't do that stuff anymore. Well, okay, you might believe that. Maybe you do, or maybe you don't.
Just like Reuters don't set up, news organizations.
Yeah.
Well, what Kit has covered, right? So
Well, don't answer yet. Okay. And so, or maybe we also have heard things about how it was just outsourced to NGOs and USAID and private organizations. And as you've noticed, people from the military intelligence who start up their own gig and start making a lot of, becoming wealthy from these things. So, the documents you found talk about an operation that with the goal of weakening the Russian state, but wouldn't it be likely that there are other operations that have, different objectives? Would you expect that the funding, you touched on this a little bit, a lot of it may come from governments, but it seems likely to me there would be other private sources of people who, oligarchs, foundations and such, who have the same kind of interests. And then I'd just like to hear your thoughts on the things I've just said. And also, like, we've already touched on this too, but like the implications of all of this. The answer to the bonus question is in a bonus segment for patrons. You can get access to these. There's one for almost every interview by subscribing at Patreon. Plus, you get access to other patrons-only episodes, Q&A live streams and such, and the Discord channel where we can talk among ourselves. So that's my tease, and I hope that some of you will join us. I'll continue now with the interview wrap-up. All right, well, let me wrap this up then. I'm going to roll back into the public part of the interview and ask you guys to, first of all, thank you very much, especially being able to talk to you both at the same time is just really great. I really appreciate it.
I really, really, really enjoyed this. Like,
oh,
so
that's
great. I so much. I can't tell you how much I wanted to like if I wasn't so exhausted and if it wasn't for the fact that this thing can't go on forever, I could basically talk about this all day.
I think we could have gone on for like 8 hours.
There's so many things. There's just like
so many threads you want dying to pull on. I know exactly what you mean.
So
it's like that. I mean, and I think as well, like that. I mean, I don't want to dictate what Mo does with his free time, but like, I mean, I've got far more to publish on this. So if you fancy, like, depending,
do it.
Let's do an update. Let's do an update. Yeah.
Let's do an update. Let's do it that way. Like, I mean, I'm more than happy to speak again. I basically currently I have about like 4 other articles I'm working on, and that's still nowhere near the extent of the kind of 200 files that were released. So like, if you want a catch up at any point, then I'm here. Very much.
It probably makes sense for the future, now that we've done this massive foundational interview, for future ones just to focus on a single piece.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Otherwise, they'd go on for forever. I know.
I'd be happy to do follow-ups too with you.
Yeah. Okay, Joan. Well, honestly, whatever works for you. Like, I mean, I'm more than happy to do them. I really enjoyed this conversation. So
now, make sure you tell everybody where to find your work, how to find you on social media. It's really important right now to have a few ways to follow journalists and other independent media too, because we never know when we're going to like just get kicked off some platform. So give us a couple ways to find your work and to keep in contact with you. You want to go first? Yeah.
I mean, I'm not on social media because I keep on getting kicked off Twitter.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
They keep on nuking my account, and I would tend to suggest it's probably 77th Brigade, which is unhappy. But that's just that's my own conspiracy theory on things.
So basically, we find your articles at RT and.
Yeah, just go to RT and type Kit Klarenberg into the search bar, and Aladdin's cave will open.
Okay. Mohammed, there are a couple ways to find you, right?
Yeah, so at M Elmaazi, M for Mohammed, and then ELMAAZI on Twitter. And I'll tweet out my articles. I've also got my own little blog called The Interregnum. But basically, if you go to my Twitter profile, there's a link there to this website called muckraker.com or something like that. And for some reason, my articles, whenever I publish them anywhere, they keep appearing there. So I just link to that.
It's weird. It's weird, isn't it? Like
it is
like,
weird. Who's doing this?
No, like I've got a muckraker profile, and like loads of stuff that you like from my Medium and keeps on getting posted there, and it's like, how is this happening?
Exactly. So I just linked to that. I think the idea is, hey, look what we can do for you. Now pay us and open up an account so you can clean it up properly, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it might be something that's designed to do that, so people find it quite useful. Because sometimes the same article gets republished, and the profile of me is not exactly accurate. I've never published in Zero Hedge. Maybe they've just copied some of my work, and loads of places republish my articles. 99% never with asking. And as long as it's not with like the Daily Stormer,
This podcast shows up in other places too. Okay.
Although Alex Jones kept republishing, or his website kept republishing my Assange coverage, which I found InfoWars.
I found that as well, where it's like, I wrote an article about the CIA MI6 support for the Kosovo Liberation Army, who were obviously fundamental to the Kosovo War happening, and like that got republished on so many different websites without my knowledge or consent, and like including Stormfront, I think, which was appalling. I was so angry. I was just like why are you doing? I don't want to be associated with you in any way. But there we are.
Do you still write on Medium, Kit?
No, I don't actually.
Okay.
I was thinking of setting up a Substack though. So like I'll next time we talk, I'll let you know.
Good. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I think it's important. I'm trying to expand to a couple more platforms too. If I could just set aside the time to pull out the archive and start uploading it and set everything up. I am in the process of doing that too. So I think it is important to be in more than one place. But listen, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
It's my absolute pleasure. Take care of yourself, Joe. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Mohammed. Great talking to you again.
Thank you for inviting us.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Kit Klarenberg and Mohamed Elmaazi. Follow Mohamed on Twitter at @melmazi. Find his writing at Sputnik News, The Canary, and visit his blog, The Interregnum. Follow Kit Klarenberg's work on RT. This podcast is independent media. Listener support really important. Patreon.com/Around the Empire. PayPal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. It's on every mobile podcast app, on the website AroundTheEmpire.com, Patreon, and on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, share, subscribe. Watch out for some new platforms where you'll be able to find this podcast pretty soon. Follow on Twitter @Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody.